Shavua Tov, we'll begin right where we left off. First thing is Daf Yomi finished Masechet Hagigah just this week, or was it last week? I know it's Yavamoth is already hard, and it's slightly confusing, but I think sometime at the end of Hagigah we got to this. It's in the final Mishnah there. Kol kilim shayu b'mikdash tunin tefillah chutz mi mizbach hazahav u'mizbach hanachoshet mipnei shehin kekarka. It says here that all of the implements of the temple, the appointments that they had in the temple, perhaps needed some occasionally to be immersed in the mikveh because they had become ritually contaminated. And that's a surprise, but you have to also know the temple was a crowded place, and sometimes there were specific kohanim and also pilgrims, non-kohanim, who did not know the laws of purity and impurity, and we considered that we hope that on holidays when they had pilgrimage, that they would have properly decontaminated themselves. But sometimes we have to assume that they did not, and their contact with these holy vessels would have contaminated those vessels. So they would have to be immersed in the mikveh. Except for, it says here, the altar, the golden altar, the one inside the Kodesh where they would offer the incense, and what's called the bronze altar, even though, as we saw, it was in already the Second Temple times, probably most the First Temple times also, it wasn't made out of bronze like it was in the desert. It was completely made out of stone. But because it had once upon a time been made out of a bronze cover, it had a bronze cover, so it was called the bronze altar. It was the altar where most of the sacrifices were altered. Why do they not require immersion? Because they're like the karka. They're actually, the outer altar is made out of stone. And so you see, it doesn't need to be, it's attached to the ground. It cannot be ritually contaminated, and therefore it cannot be immersed. Also, considering its size, it probably wasn't, probably could not be lifted by any machine, unless you have, I don't know how much did the Mizbeach weigh. We saw 32 by 32 amos at its base, and made out of stone. So that was something that was impractical, and also something that could not become contaminated because it was connected to the ground. Buildings and the other things connected to the ground are susceptible to ritual contamination. And the same applies to the golden altar. Rabbi Eliezer, that's what Rabbi Eliezer says, Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. The Chachamim say, the sages say, Mipnei shehem mitzupim, because they are actually, they're coated with metal. This one's coated with gold, and this one was originally coated with, like I said, bronze, eventually was coated with a plaster. And the Gemara is actually going to ask this question. Just because something is coated doesn't mean it's not susceptible to impurity. And the Gemara actually continues there. Mizbach hanachoshet tichtiv mizbach adama ta'aseli. He knows this because it actually says it, that the outer altar was made out of earth. And mizbach zahav, how do you know? The tichtiv hamarav mizbachot itkush mizbachot zelazu. It says the golden altar because the pasuk connects them to each other. Hamarav mizbachot. It says here that is what the Levites were in charge of, specifically the Kohathites were in charge of carrying in the wilderness, and it connects the two mizbachot. They have the same din. So itkush mizbachot zolazo. They are connected, which means that the Gemara continues there. By the way, over here we're going to see this next line. Well, the sages didn't mean their coating prevents them from being susceptible to impurity. They say no, adarabba. On the contrary, kevin tzupim minhu mitamu. Okay. It should be that because these things are coated in metal, I would have they're considered like metal implements or devices, and usually things made out of metal are susceptible to impurity. So there's a correction here. Ema, you should say the Chachamim do say that these things are contaminatable or susceptible to contamination because they are coated. Or if you want, Vibayith Ema, if you want, say Rabbanon. The Rabbi Eliezer Kamri. The Rabbanan are responding to Rabbi Eliezer and saying, "My dadcha mishum detzupim mivtal batil tzipun gabayhu." Rabbi Eliezer, are you thinking that they should not be susceptible to impurity because they are coated with something? No, that the coating shouldn't count. Either way, the point over here is that you see that the outer altar was actually made out of dirt, so to speak. It wasn't made out of things that the ground is made of, stone, dirt, etc. Whereas the the inner altar, the one made out of gold, was not susceptible, according to the sages, because of this limud, this specific pasuk over here, but not because it was connected to the ground. And this sheds light on something that we saw a few weeks ago. And we saw that other commentators brought in a wonderful essay by Rabbi Makover, assumed that the golden altar of the first temple was connected to the ground. And they had some nice divrei Torah about that. However, we also saw that the Vilna Gaon disagreed. He held that the first temple's golden altar was not filled with earth and not part of the construction, and that it was actually just the same golden altar but doubled in size. Why didn't he hold like those other commentators? We see why, because this Gemara over here, this Gemara basically says that according to the sages, the golden altar was not connected to the ground. You would have thought that's Rabbi Elazar's opinion. According to Chachamim, it was an implement, a movable implement, not attached to the ground, made out of gold, basically. It was hollow, but made out of gold, just like the golden table and the golden menorah, and was susceptible to impurity, except for the fact that this pasuk removed it from that category. Special pasuk indicating that it had a din like the actual mizbach hanachoshet, the mizbach olah, the main altar, which was not susceptible to impurity. So there we go. We can see that explains why the Vilna Gaon held the way he did, and it makes quite a lot of sense. Let's continue. We got a question. Hold on. We have to always check if we're getting questions by way of the WhatsApp or if it's just something extraneous. No, that's going to be for next time. Okay. We're free to go. Okay. Here's a map that also sheds light on something that we saw last week. The area defined by the Rambam as considered Tzafon, of the Mizbeach. And he described this place as being from the wall of the Ulam until the eastern wall of the Azara, and from the northern wall all the way until the altar. And he called it a merubah. As we pointed out, doesn't mean a square, it means a rectangle. So here you see the rectangular area defined by the Rambam as Tzafon. Why does Tzafon matter? Because certain sacrifices had to be slaughtered in this area. That was their limitation. And those are considered the burnt offerings and the sin offerings, what's called the Kodesh Kodeshim. Whereas other offerings, let's say the peace offering, the Korban Pesach, could be slaughtered anywhere in this courtyard. They're just not inside the temple itself and not on the Mizbeach. And other opinions say, no, just the northern half, which would mean, if I'm using my cursor, if you could see it properly, it's basically the northern half of the Azara. It's a larger area. And there's room to say that, no, it's only because it says Yerech HaMizbeach Tzafona, it's more limited than what the Rambam says. It wouldn't include this area up here and this area down here on the east and the west, but mostly just the area that's directly north of the altar. But this is, like I said, this is taken from, I think, the Korean edition, and it shows us how the Rambam would define north of the altar, the place where the most holy sacrifices had to be slaughtered. Continuing the halachot over here. V'shalosh Shabatzafon, the northern part of the Ezrat Yisrael had other rooms there, and once again we're going to take a look at the different maps according to the Rambam and according to Kahati. He used the other Rishonim as his sources where exactly these things were. The first one is Lishkat HaGazit, Lishkat HaGula, and Lishkat HaEtz. Gazit means hewn stone, and Gula is a device, we're going to see, a water drawing device, and Lishkat HaEtz, the wood chamber. Lishkat HaGazit, he says, Sheba Sanhedrin Gedolah Yoshevet. That's where the great Sanhedrin would sit, and also known as just the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, of course, is from a Greek word, meaning like a gathering of elders or a senate. Senate is a Latin term. The Romans had a senate. The Jewish people always had an institution of their leader and 70 elders. That's what Moses had. He was their leader. He had 70 elders with him, and that was an institution that was mostly throughout Jewish history until the Byzantines put an end to it. And eventually they adopted this Greek word to refer to this court that always existed. And they had their place on the Temple Mount in this chamber. The Chatziyah Kodesh v'Chatziyah Cho. Chatziyah Haya Kodesh v'Chatziyah Cho. Half of it was Kodesh, half was not holy. I wouldn't say it's secular because once again it's on the Temple Mount. By Kodesh it means has the sanctity of the courtyard, which means that that was the part in which they could not sit. Literally, they could not sit. But here sometimes it says Sanhedrin Gedolah Yoshevet. This is also like in English. It's not literally sit. It means the place where it meets. But that half of the room, which was technically not the inner courtyard of the temple, they could sit there. And the other half of the room, they could not sit there. Why? Because it's forbidden to sit in the courtyard of the temple, as we saw, except the Davidic monarch is allowed to sit there. And we asked, before David was anointed, was it any monarch or whoever was the leader of the Jewish people? And it was only once David was elected, that is elected by God and appointed by the Jewish people, that it became the exclusive right of his rightful heirs. I think that that would be the proper interpretation because we saw, for example, that apparently Eli, the Kohen Gadol, himself was sitting in the courtyard of the temple, perhaps near the courtyard, near the tent of meeting, and he had the right to sit there because he was at that point the de jure, if not de facto, leader of the Jewish people. He was the shofet. It says that when he died, he had judged Israel for 40 years. So he was the shofet, and once again, the shoftim who preceded David, each had the status. The shoftim who preceded Saul, each had the status of Jewish king until Saul became an actual king. This room, the Lishkat Gazit, had two entrances. One towards the holier area, the temple courtyard, and one to the less holy area, which would be outside the temple courtyard within the Chil. On this side of that was less holy, that's where they'd actually sit, as I just explained. Here we have a more detailed map of this Ezrath Yisrael. And this is Kahati's map over here. I'm trying to look for the Rambam map, the Makbili map. I think maybe just because we are saving this thing, it came out wrong. Could very well be because technical difficulties were missing this. Did we see the Makbili map? What happened to the Makbili map? That's very strange. Well, oh, here we go. This is actually, the two maps are stuck. I'm going to shrink this one. It's a formatting issue. So let's move this over here and create more space over here. Okay, good. Over here, this in front of us is the Makbili map. This is the Makbili map indicating the different spaces between everything. This is they basically agree on this one. How many amoth were between the northern wall of the Azara and the Beit Bar-Hayim, and how much room for the tables and the rings that they had for slaughtering and the actual altar. That's indicated here. But look over here. This is what we're looking at over here. This is Rath Yisrael. According to the Makbili map, Lishkat HaGazith was over here. It's on the north side. It's not bordering the northern border of the temple courtyard. And it's just over here. And this is Lishkat HaGula, as we saw. We didn't describe that yet. This is Lishkat HaEtzim. These are the three chambers on the south side that we saw last week. This is his interpretation. Whereas you look at this one, Kahati, which he includes with Midot, which is based on other Mefarshim, you see over here. Here's the Lishkat HaGula right up there, and Lishkat HaGazith and Lishkat HaPalhadrin. They're not in the Ezrath Yisrael as he defines them. And here's those three other chambers on the south side. So you can see very big difference. These two chambers over here, Lishkat, it got cut off over here. There's two Lishachot over here. We said of the Menachot and the Chavitin and all that. They put them over here. This is the Osei Chavitin one over here, and you can see the rest of them. The way it works out is certainly, let's just say the fact that these three chambers are placed all the way over here, it doesn't fit with what Rambam says about how there should be in Ezrath Yisrael. Also over here, these chambers are already beyond Ezrath Yisrael. So what does it even mean? So it must be they don't hold literally like the way Rambam holds. Also, they basically put the Lishkat HaGazit, like I said, its secular side or less holy side is beyond the Kodesh, but towards the north. And once again, whenever we encounter these types of discrepancies, we pray that one day we get to see what the real answer is going to be. Where is everything supposed to be? Where was everything? Perhaps we'll never know, and the Sanhedrin will just decide what it should be. Let's go on with this. Lishkat HaGula. I put it according to real Nikud. There's no vav here. There's just a dot in the lamed. It was a place Sham Haya Bor Shemamalim Mimenu Bagula. That's where they had a cistern where they'd fill out the water using a gula, this device, basically a water wheel, in order to lift the water out of it. Misham Sapim Maim L'chol Azara. And that's how they provide water to the entire Azara. For whatever purposes, sometimes they'd wash sacrifices off. Don't forget, you have to wash off the entrails. And for other reasons, they needed water. So that's where they had their water storage. Lishkata Eitz, Haitha Acharesh Dehan. This wood chamber of the wood, was behind both of them. See, that's what they put over here. That's what the Rambam seems to be saying. So it's behind both of them. Lishkata Gazit and Lishkata Gula. So Lishkata Eitz is beyond it. That is, if someone was standing at rest of Eretz Ezrat Yisrael, Lishkata Eitz would be over here. Vihi Aita Lishka Kohen Gadol. It was also a place where the Kohen Gadol had his personal chamber. Viyanik Great Lishkat Paladrin. So it's also called Lishkat Paladrin. The Gad Shloshtan Shaveh. They all had one roof that was the same level. Why does it matter? Because the level of the roof of a particular building, if it is roofed, actually has consequences for its particular level of holiness. Also, the level of its floor and its entrances, as we shall see forthwith. There are two more lishachot there in Ezrat Yisrael. Achat miyamin shara mizrachi, one to the right of Shar Mizrachi. That's where it's seeing over here. V'lishkat pinchas malbish. That's what you can't see cut off over here. Apparently, there was someone who at the time was very good at making the priestly vestments. His name was Pinchas. So thereafter, this place was called his chamber, even if he was only in one generation. And we have similar examples of certain synagogues where the name of the person who, thank God, was good enough to sponsor it, give the money toward that construction, so it's known by his name for quite a while after that. V'achat mispalo, one to the left, which would be Muhi Lishkat Osei Chavitin. That's where they would make these, they would prepare the meal offerings. Kohen Gadol had to bring a type of chavit, minchat chavitin every day, and similar to the minchat chinuch. So that's where they would prepare these meal offerings, as we'll see later. V'zohi tzurat kol hashachot v'azara kula lefi midotel. Now that's the entire azara according to its midot, and you see that's where he puts in the picture in the classic commentaries that's similar to this one, which the Rambam has written out. I think we saw it earlier. And if we haven't seen it earlier, then we're going to see it again. We don't have it on the screen right now. But then he has in his handwriting, I think in the Machon Mamre edition, they leave it out. And this is this is based on the Rambam's handwritten drawing. So we're pretty much certain how the Rambam believed it. But like I said, there are those who disagree. Let's start the sixth parak. Hamikdash kulo lo hayab mishur. The entire temple wasn't on one level. By the way, this is another example where the Rambam is basically calling what we call the Temple Mount, he's calling it the Mikdash, the temple, because as we've seen, according to the Rambam, the entire Temple Mount is the temple. Ela b'malei har is actually on the slope of a mountain. That is, so you're starting on the Temple Mount, you're always making ascendants. You're always ascending somewhere. There's ascensions. When a person comes in through the eastern gate of the Temple Mount, he could walk up to the Chel without having to ascend anywhere. It's all one level. In order to get up into the women's courtyard, he has to go up 12 steps. Every one of these steps has a height of 6 cubits, and is chetziyama 1 cubit, and it also has the laterally it's half a cubit. That is, it's basically a square step up a half and to the right a half, or forward a half, or an ascent total of 6 cubits over a distance of 6 cubits towards the west. So he can go up, if there's 12 steps and each one goes up half an amos, so he's gone up 6 amos. That's a cubit, which is basically, we saw each cubit's about 1.5 feet. So this is he goes up about 9 feet over the course of 9 feet to the west. And then, and then he could walk the entire women's courtyard, the outer courtyard, without having to ascend anything. It's all one level. Well, let me menel Ezrat Yisrael, and then he could go up to the Ezrat Yisrael, which is part of the inner courtyard. Shehi Tchilat Azara, which is the beginning of the courtyard, he said here. Bechamesh Esrei Malot, another 15 steps. Room Kol Malah Chatziyama, V'Shilcha Chatziyama. Well, once again, each step is half an amma, and it's over the course of half an amma. So if he's going up 15 of these steps, 15 of steps, and each one of them is half an amma, so he's going to go up another ascent of 7.5 cubits over a space of 7.5 cubits. And this is what allows for, today we're going to enlarge this map. This is a main map that you can find online. It's also included in most editions of the Rambam, where there are natural steps still on the Temple Mount indicating where the ascensions are. This is where people pray. This is the eastern area. As you see, what they call east doesn't exactly match the current outer wall of the Temple Mount on the east side. It's not parallel to it exactly, but don't forget, that's a later creation. So this is more in tune with the topography of the Temple Mount as we see it now. For example, this ascension over here still exists. And this seems to be the way how they map it out. There's a straight line over here, mostly straight line, and it seems to be that ascension. There's also an ascension over here indicating the way up to the women's courtyard. It's only been changed very slightly there, and that seems to match, like I said, the topography, and considering the fact that we have a long tradition, Jewish and non-Jewish, that the area of the Kodesh is basically that rock within the Dome of the Rock, we can safely place the entire temple and its environs. And that would mean over here, by the way, this is the space of the altar. And don't forget, the altar was quite large. We see how much space it takes up the map. You have basically a 32. This is the most common question I get, by the way. I think we got it at the end of one of our last shiurim. I remember learning about this 15 years ago and seeing this for the first time myself. You basically have a space here that's almost 50 feet. You have 32 by 1.5. Comes out to about 48 feet or so. You have 48 feet by 48 feet square over here, and where to put the altar. So you can't really miss the place of the altar here, even if there are other opinions that say the temple should actually be rotated slightly over here or shifted. Anyway, you still have a huge area over here that is altar according to everybody. And you could put, technically speaking, a smaller altar if necessary, as we saw before. And that would allow for the reinstitution of the sacrificial service on a moment's notice. And we could even do that tomorrow. So that's why it's important we see this. So now a person has ascended. We saw on this picture, this is the beginning of the Har-Bayit thing. The person go through the Chil. This is an illustration or a similar one that's in most editions of the Rambam, because you can find it also in the Perush HaMishnayot. There's an ascension here of 6 ammas, another ascension here of 7.5, leading to a total of 13.5 ammas to get up to the Ezrat Yisrael. There's a gate over here. There would be a gateway over here. And he continues, Malach kol Ezrat Yisrael b'shaveh. He could walk the entire Ezrat Yisrael, which isn't that far, by the way, on one level. V'olam imena Ezrat Kohanim b'malei gvoa amma. You then ascend one more time to the area where the Kohanim are supposed to be working. But technically speaking, Israelites could still go there. They just weren't supposed to all the time. It could get in the way. And as we saw, sometimes they even push even as far as into the Ulam, and that's how some of the Kelim could have become contaminated. They would continue. The Aliyah ve'aleh duchan yesh bo shalosh malot. Then there was a platform over here, the platform where the Levites would stand and play their instrument, sing, and where the Israelites who play the instruments would be. Room kol malach chatziyama v'shalcha chatziyama. Once again, every step has a height or an ascension of half an amma over the course of half an amma, moving toward the west. And therefore, you can calculate that the Ezrat Kohanim was about 2.5 ammas higher than the Ezrat Yisrael. Rashi has this slightly differently. That we're not going to get into that calculation because I don't have a good illustration of it. Rashi has it, like I said, about half an amma discrepancy here. Well, he can walk this entire area once again down in the ascensions until to get into the hall, the outer room of the temple building, is another 12 ammas. Once again, room kol amma chatziyama v'shalcha amma. In this case, You go up one half of an amma over the course of one amma, so it's significantly less steep. It's about half as steep. And the floor of the ulam and the rest of the heichal was equal. So you could see here all the different indications. This basically adds up to a total ascension of 22 ammas from the original floor of the Temple Mount. And they say this actually had halachic consequences because there's supposed to be a way for the Kohen who's preparing the red heifer out on the Mount of Olives across the way. It's kind of tricky because we've now converted a large part of the Mount of Olives and Mount Scopus is one gigantic cemetery, and that sort of gets in the way of preparing the ashes of the Parah Duma. I always wonder why they started putting a cemetery there, by the way. Very strange place to put a cemetery. But once upon a time, there was no Jewish cemetery there. And by the way, there's even a closer cemetery, like just beyond the eastern way there, the eastern wall of the Temple Mount, there's a Muslim cemetery. Very strange place to put cemeteries, but sometimes they did this intentionally. The sages certainly did not intend for those types of things. That's where they prepare the ashes of the Parah Duma. Why is a cemetery a weird thing to put there? Because the ashes of the Parah Duma was used to prepare the water for sprinkling, and that was the only way to purify men and vessels from contamination imparted through contact with the dead. It continues. Nimtza gova karka echal ad al karka shar mizrach shel arbayit. The floor of the actual echal, compared to the rest of the Temple Mount, that just begin the Temple Mount, esri mushtam amot, is a total of 22 amos in elevation. Gova shar harabayit esri mama. The height of the gate of the Temple Mount over here was a total of 20. So what does that mean? There's a consequence. That means if you're standing over here, you have 2 ammas able to see over the gate through the entrance of the ulam, assuming it's open at the time. The fichach homed keneged shar mizrach, someone standing opposite the eastern gate. Eino ro'eh petach eichal. If you're actually standing here, you cannot see into the eichal. You don't have a clear view over here, technically speaking, because it's 20 amos tall. And you would be just looking at the floor over here. If technically speaking, you could see it on a diagonal. People have eyes. They could be looking in this direction, but they can't see through. They would be looking up basically. They would be stopped by the wall over here, their line of vision. See, let's say you have a regular person over here the person is 2 amas tall. That's usually the proportions of a person. So if a person's over here standing 2 amas tall, he could see these areas over here, but he couldn't see through the gate of the temple because this is already 22 amas up, and he only has 20 amas to see in there. So we can't see this door over there. So this wall over here that's on top of the gate, the eastern gate, was kind of low. Someone standing on Har HaMishcha. Mishcha is Aramaic, borrowed from Aramaic, meaning oil. Nowadays, any type of ointment or rub or a polish is called Mishcha in modern Hebrew. By the way, Mishcha is what you're supposed to do. It's a verb in Hebrew, meaning what you do with the oil, and that's what it becomes in Aramaic. There's an aleph at the end indicating that it's a noun. So, like I said, this is sort of borrowed Hebrew or influenced by Mishnaic slash rabbinic Hebrew. Why is the Mount of Olive called, by the way, the Mount of Oil? Because olives produce oil. So a person standing over here could see over this gate into the Eichal. He has about 2 amas of sight to see in there. At the time when the Kohen who's preparing the ashes, he's burning the cow there, so he has to sprinkle in the direction. You have to sprinkle some of the water, etc., and he has the whole ritual he does with hyssop and the red string. He has to do this. He could do the opposite, the entrance to the Eichal, and he could actually see the entrance. Does he have to see in? No, he doesn't have to see in. And by the way, even if he could see in, he wouldn't see beyond the parochet over here. 6th halacha, uleshachot hayusham tachat ezrat Yisrael ptuchim leezrat anashim. There were other rooms that were open to the Israelite courtyard, under the Israelite courtyard, but they're open to the women's courtyard. We can see on the map that would be somewhere over here. Uh, or there's even better in the Kati map, you could see it. There's a way down into here, Lishachoth. So that would be this room, and that'd be this room. So why is that important? Because they were technically under Ezrath Yisrael, and that actually has a consequence. He says over here, that's where the Levites would put their harps, or sometimes kinor is just a general word for string instrument, which is why you're going to find that a kinor sometimes is a harp, sometimes the violin. What did King David play? He had a kinor. So in the olden days they called it a harp. And nowadays you might see that King David had a fiddle or a violin. What's the answer? Well, technically speaking, they're very similar. They're both string instruments that are handheld, as opposed to, let's say, a string instrument like a guitar, which is relatively new, how they'd hold that. Although guitars are quite old, we don't see guitars, let's say, in classic chazal stores as we see a string instruments like these, or a piano, which is just a very large string instrument that is so large that it basically has to have its own legs. Van Nevalim, and these are the flutes and the mitziltayim. And if I get that wrong, please correct me. Mitziltayim is the cymbals, the chol klei ashir, and other musical instruments. Va'aduchan holem Ezrat Yisrael Ezrat Kohanim. And on this platform that went up from the Israelite courtyard to the one of the Kohanim, Hayu halavim omdim b'sha'ar she'orim shira al korban. They would stand there. Oh, sorry, b'sha'ah. The Levim would stand there when they were singing on the sacrifice. When on the sacrifice means when the sacrifice was offered, certain public sacrifices, that's when they would sing. More specifically, they would sing when the libations were offered. And see Sefer Haggadah Pesach for an explanation. Wait a minute, we have it. The Levim were singing the entire time they were offering Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach did not have any libations. So how would they know when to sing? And where are the libations of the Korban Pesach? And there we suggested that the Korban Pesach itself also has no meal offering. Adrabah, it's that the Korban Pesach, when it's consumed by the priests, the Jewish people themselves who are eating Korban Pesach, are as though eating Korban Pesach in an extended temple courtyard. And the matzah and the wine that they eat in conjunction with the Korban Pesach serve as the meal offerings and libations. And that's why the Jewish people are bidden to sing the Hallel also when they eat their Korban Pesach. Let's continue here. These rooms, important word. These rooms that were standing in Kodesh and they were open to secular areas. So if, let's say, look on a map, you find a room over here. Kati has them better. So they're standing in the Kodesh, but they're open toward the outside. Take Lishkat HaGazit, it's standing in the Kodesh, but it's open to the outside, the area that's, let's say, just ordinary Temple Mount and not the actual Hazarah. Im hayu gagotem shavim im karka hazarah. If their roofs were level with the floor of the inner courtyard, that's what the inner courtyard here means, tochan chol. So they are considered less holy. See, just because their roofs are level with the courtyard doesn't mean that they are holy. V'gagotenem kodesh. Their roofs are holy, just like the courtyard itself. Whatever is level with the courtyard, which is considered more the most holy place, so too are their roofs. V'in einan shavim. If they're not level, af gagotehem chol. Then even the roofs are not holy. Shagagot v'aliyot lo nitkadshu. These gagot, these anything that's the roof or aliyot is basically ramparts or overhangings, the mirpeset, the galleries. Those were not sanctified along with the courtyard. The fikach gagim. That's why these roofs ein ochlim sham kodesh kodeshim. If they do not have the same status as the inner courtyard, then the kohanim who are allowed to eat kodesh kodeshim, that is the meat from the sin offerings and the guilt offerings, they can't eat them there. They have to eat those places in technically what's azara. And also you can't slaughter even less holy sacrifice. Let's say, for example, the shlamim and Korban Pesach, they have to be slaughtered in the azara. So these places don't have a status for the azara. And this brings up an interesting halacha that's actually kind of missing. We haven't found a source for this yet. There's been various guesses in our day. How do the kohanim eat the sacrificial foods in the temple? They have to be in the azara when they eat it, or something that counts as the azara. But we also saw that no one's allowed to sit in those areas. Certainly no kohen any time since the temple was built. In the close to a millennium that we've had the temple service in practice. In the last 2 millennia, when we've been negligent with the temple service, No one's been allowed to sit in that area. So does that mean that when the Kohanim eat their sacrificial foods, they have to be standing? It doesn't seem to fit because the sages have rules that it's not proper. It's not derech eretz for people to eat in standing positions. They don't like the whole buffet style. Certainly not the kiddush, where unfortunately in our great sins we are used to standing while eating. The sages consider that uncouth. As a matter of fact, not only do they consider standing uncouth, they considered sitting at a table on an ordinary chair like you and I do. Even that was considered uncouth. The proper way to sit and eat a proper meal was to be reclining, like we do. Well, at least they used to do on Passover. It used to be a poor man. At least he has a small bed on which to sleep and a different type of bed. You and I wouldn't recognize it as a bed. It's more like a padded bench on which he reclines when he eats, and that's the way everybody used to eat, and that's the proper way that was meant for good health. So it's kind of tricky. Where did the Kohanim eat? So I've seen various suggestions that there was a room where, technically speaking, it was still Kodesh, but because it wasn't the Azarah, it wasn't out in the open, it was roofed. So it didn't seem that that was an insult. It wasn't this dispensation given to the Davidic monarch, and only he could sit in the courtyard, was referring to the actual courtyard area. But then again, others say no, that can't be, because we see that these rooms where they could potentially be sitting, no, you're not allowed to sit there, and that's where the most holy sacrifices could be eaten. That's where the less holy sacrifice could be slaughtered, implying that these places were entirely Azarah, which means they would also have this rule against anybody sitting there unless they were a Davidic monarch. So once again, let's put this on the list of things that we will, God willing, find an answer to soon. Next, halacha chet. Hayu binuyot b'chol uvtuchot lakodesh. These rooms were built outside of the Azarah. They're standing beyond the actual walls of the Azarah, but they're open toward the Kodesh. Tochan Kodesh la'achila kodshei kodeshim. So the areas inside are considered part of the Azarah, considered holy. L'may nafkamina. What's the halachic implication? That they could eat there. The Kohanim could eat the holy sacrifices there. They could not slaughter the less holy sacrifice in those places. If a person went in there in a state of impurity that normally couldn't go into, let's say, the real Azarah, he would be exempt. He's not allowed in there, but he would not be punished for this, for such thing. The gagotehen, and their roofs, which are of course not level with the courtyard, because we already said their floors and their entrances are certainly not kodesh. Another halacha, in other editions they have a halacha, they make halacha here. According to Machon Mamre, there's no halacha here. These passageways that snaked under the temple and its environs, those open to the Azarah, those are kodesh, and there are quite a few of them. And the ones that are open to the rest of the Temple Mount, those are considered just like the rest of the Temple Mount, chol. They're not as holy. Once again, we keep having this word here. It doesn't mean completely secular or non-holy, just less holy. If you have a window or the width of the wall, these gates, for example, are quite wide. Let's say the wall itself had a width of a foot or two. So you're standing in the gateway. That's considered part of the area beyond the gateway on the inside. And that place, therefore, was considered part of the area where a person could eat, or Kohen could eat the most holy sacrifices, and also where there was standard of impurity or purity applied, just like in the Azarah. That is, a person who's impure could not enter those places and would likely be punished. Next, Beit Din Shiratzu Losif Al Yerushalayim. It gets into a different topic here. You have a court that wants to extend Jerusalem. Why do you need to extend Jerusalem? We extend, thank God, Jerusalem all the time. The modern city of Jerusalem has sprawled well beyond anything we could have imagined. It's starting to approach that as imagined by the prophets of old. But that's not considered halachically Jerusalem. L'may nafkamina, well, they still observe Shushan Purim in those places. That's a different thing. They're talking about the place where one could eat less holy sacrifices. The less holy sacrifices, for example, Korban Pesach, which is a very practical one, even today, have to be eaten within the areas of Jerusalem that are officially sanctified. And that was very limited. And there was a ritual to do it. Olo sifa azarot mosifim, or to extend the various courtyards, there is a way for them to do it. But there's a limit. The Azarot cannot go beyond what's physically Har Bayit. Herod found a way to extend Har Bayit, but right now you can see it's quite limited by the topography there and the walls. The Har Bayit cannot be extended, for example, toward what's nowadays called the Jewish quarter, where the yeshivas are. But technically speaking, Jerusalem, its halachic wall can be extended as far as they want. We could even include Ramot and Piskat Ze'ev and Neve Yaakov and Gilo, all those places, thank God, even Beit HaKerem. All those places in the future can be extended. That is, the sanctity of Jerusalem can be extended there, and we'll be able to eat the sacrifices there. However, Ein Mosifim al Hir o al Azarot Ella al Pi Melech al Pi Navi. You have to have a king and a prophet and Urim v'Tumim. Question: do you actually need the prophet to do this? The prophet to endorse it, or the prophet just has to be there? How do you know someone's a prophet? So it's kind of difficult. We haven't had one in a while, so obviously this ritual has not been conducted in quite a long time. Urim v'Tumim, and you need a Kohen Gadol who's getting responses from the Urim and Tumim, also saying that they've been apparently lacking since the beginning of Second Temple times. The Al-Pi Sanhedrin Shel Shivim ve'Echad Zekinim, and you need the Sanhedrin of 71 elders, as it says. That was not talking about the extension of the tabernacle. That was what God first told Moses how to build the tabernacle. But you have to do it as God showed him. Lidorot, that's what you guys have to do it. Moshe Rabbeinu Melech Haya. At the time that Moshe Rabbeinu was shown how to first construct the first courtyard of the very first sanctuary, they had all these statuses. Why? Well, Moshe Rabbeinu, he counted as the king because he was the leader. He also happened to be a Navi, and he had 70 elders, so he was the 71st elder. And his brother was a Kohen Gadol with the Urim v'Tumim, and that is the paradigm. So whenever they extend the city, apparently in First Temple times, we saw earlier that they made a new courtyard in the times of Yehoshaphat, and apparently that's what they did originally with King Solomon. So that's how they're supposed to do it. For the rest of the generations, and that'll basically bring us to the end of what we're doing tonight. Next week, God willing, we'll connect these halachot to what we've been seeing on the weeknights regarding the eternal sanctity of the temple and why that makes a difference for these halachot. Don't forget, if you have any questions or comments, please share them, like, share, and subscribe. And we close with a prayer that speedily, in our days, all of these halachot become more than just l'maaseh, but they actually be put into practice by us and the rest of our brethren. Have a good week and be well.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.